Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's good to see everybody here this morning. I guess before I get into the lesson I'll spend a little time, for those of you who I haven't met yet, just give you a little bit of information, a little bit of background about me and my family. Of course, I have with me my wife, Heather, and my daughter, Addison, and we are originally from Tennessee, specifically the western side of Tennessee, just outside of Memphis. Lived there pretty much my whole life, and we've been in Nebraska now, southwest Nebraska, for the past 6 years there. And we've been to Wyoming a few times. I was talking to some of you, and there are different places in Wyoming, but we've never actually came to Riverton. And on the drive up here, I thought, this is a really beautiful place. Like, why have we never been to Riverton? Like, I don't know why. It just never showed up on the radar, I guess. But we really enjoy our time here so far. We've really enjoyed getting to meet all you people. And if we haven't got to meet you yet, be sure to stick around and visit with us. If you have any questions, anything, feel free to ask and spend a little time, get to know each other a little bit better. In our Bible class, we were talking about the ways in which we can try to reverse the decline that we're seeing in Christianity in America today. I mean, it's no secret. You've heard it before. You know that Christianity today just doesn't seem to be what it used to be, and fewer people are going to church now. And what can we do about it as Christians? So we kind of went over that in our Bible class, but what I want to do today, now in the sermon, is I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to speak to you about how we can be encouraged and built up as Christians. Because I'm convinced that there's two things that every church needs. They need to know that, you know what, we need to do good works. We need to go out and live like Christ and bring people to know Him. But I also think we need to be encouraged and uplifted, because if we're not, why would we do anything? So I really believe that encouragement, being edified, is a really important part of Christianity, and sometimes we overlook that. So I want to take you to Romans chapter 1. And what I'm going to share with you today is God's blessings. I want you to think with me about the ways in which God blesses us. And to do that, let's start with Romans chapter 1. We're going to look at verse 7. Romans 1, verse 7. This is the way Paul starts his letter here. He says, "To all those in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ." Now, if you've ever read much of Paul's letters, you know that that's the way that he started virtually every letter that he wrote. Grace and peace to you. He wished grace and peace on the people he wrote his letters to. Now, what he's essentially saying in that is, I want God to bless you. I want God to give you these things. I want God to bless you with His grace and God to bless you with His peace. Now, when we think of God blessing us, do we ever think of those things? I think as Americans, many times we immediately go to the physical stuff. When we think of God blessing us, we think about getting money. Oh yeah, we see that as a blessing from God. I got money, or I got this. But do we ever stop and really appreciate the spiritual blessings? You know, in Ephesians 1 verse 3, Paul said, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ." Spiritual blessings really mean a lot. So let me put it to you this way. Maybe this will help you to see what I'm saying here. Can you really even enjoy material blessings or material things if it wasn't for the spiritual blessings? You could have all the money in the world, but if you ain't got peace, you're not going to enjoy a dime of that money. If you don't have peace, how can you enjoy any of it? I saw this video one time of this guy he was rich. He's a young guy, and he was sitting in his Jeep, and he made a video before he committed suicide about how miserable he was. And I'm thinking, why are you miserable? You've got the dream life. You've got money. You're sitting in a beautiful car, and you're just sitting there crying. I've heard some people say before, well, if I'm going to be miserable and I'm going to be crying, I'd rather do my crying in a Jeep. Well, I got a Jeep Grand Cherokee out here, and I'm going to tell you, crying in that ain't no different than crying in a Mercedes. If you don't have peace, you don't have peace. It doesn't matter. None of that stuff means anything. And I'll tell you, even in my own life, I remember years ago, one day I was outside, and I was looking around, and I said, I've got so much stuff. I am so blessed. I said, here's a house I've got these vehicles, I have this, I have that, all this stuff. And I said, but I can't enjoy any of it. I said, because I'm miserable. And I realized in that moment, I had to admit it to myself, I don't have peace. I said, I ought to be happy. I ought to be thrilled. This is the best time in my life right now. And here I am miserable. And I realized I don't have peace. And that was a total change in my life. And I realized it's not about the physical stuff. I said, I've got to have God and His grace and His peace in my life. Our life is just not worth living, you know. So I think sometimes, sad to say, that we overlook those things. When we start looking for blessings, we start looking for physical things. And I'm not downplaying that. I'm not saying God doesn't bless us with physical things. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying let's not overlook the spiritual. Because no matter how much God blesses you materially, how much of it are you going to take when you leave? None of us came in here with anything, and we ain't leaving with anything either, folks. But the spiritual stuff that God gives us in this life, that stuff's going to echo through eternity. That's the stuff that you do take with you. So let's not overlook that. And here's another point I want to make. I want you to understand, and I didn't see this for a long time in my life, just how good God is at blessing us. Y'all, God blesses us so much every day with so many things that we can't even take it all in. God blesses us so much. There's blessings running around all over the place that we don't even see it. We're so used to these blessings that we don't even see it anymore. In Acts 17:26, Paul went to Athens, and those people, of course, were worshiping idols and everything, and Paul started talking to them about who the true God was. And he said, I'm going to tell you about the true God who made the world and everything that's in it. In Acts 17:26, he talks about how He gives to all life and breath and all things. The God I'm speaking to you about is the God that gives breath and life to you. So when is the last time that we've thanked God for that? For breath? Just being alive. That's a blessing from God here. It's a gift that God gives us. You know, imagine it like this. Let's just say all of a sudden you couldn't take your next breath. We're sitting here and you can't take your next, you can't breathe anymore. If that were to happen to you, would you be sitting here thinking about money? Well, I hope I get enough money to pay my bills. I hope nobody touches my car. Like, that's not going to be going through your head. If you can't take your next breath, the only thing going to be on your mind is getting that next breath. And in that moment, you're going to realize just how great of a blessing that was that you enjoyed every second of the day and you took it for granted. You know, and it gets me, there's some people who complain and they say, well, God's never blessed me with anything. And I'm thinking, you're using a blessing to say God's not blessing you. The very breath God has given you right now, you're using to say He's not blessing you. You know, that's just how common God's blessings are to everybody. Let's not overlook those things, church. Let's make sure that we appreciate that every day. All the things God gives us that we overlook. Now let's think about this too. God is so good at blessing you and me that He can take anything, and I mean anything, even the things that are meant to hurt us, and turn it into something that blesses us. Now, I'm not always good at seeing that. I'll admit that to you. But as years have gone by, I've gotten a little better at noticing that. You know, I think we all have struggles in our own life. Everybody has something that hurts them, that pushes their buttons, that drives them crazy, that gets underneath their skin. We all have issues and things that we deal with in life, problems. We all got them. I'll tell you this story, and it may make me look bad here, but I'll tell it to you anyway. But I have this thing that if I go somewhere, I don't like being in big crowds. If I go to the grocery store and I'm walking around and I look down an aisle and it's loaded with people, I'm saying, nope, I'll wait and meander around and go back to that aisle later. I don't like going down a crowded aisle, you know. I sort of have a SEAL Team 6 mentality when I go grocery shopping, in and out, right? Just get it done. Well, I remember one time I was in the grocery store and I was going down this aisle and there's this lady standing there. And of course, she's standing exactly where I need to be. And I'm getting impatient. And I'm thinking, all right, Grandma, time to move. I got to get my stuff. And I'm thinking that. And by the time that's going through my head, she looks at me and she says, can you help me get this off this top shelf? And I'm like, yes, ma'am. And I help her get it down. And I'm like, you know, here I am being all impatient, but she needed to get her stuff too. And I thought, lady, you don't realize it, but you're blessing me with something here. You're teaching me patience, and you're teaching me to serve. We all have little things like that. I know that's sort of a funny story, but we all have things like that. You've probably got coworkers, family members, relatives, neighbors that just do things that get under your skin and hurt you. And we all probably have enemies in life too. I remember I met a lady one day and she came up and said, I don't think I have any enemies in my life. And I thought to myself, well, sister, good for you. I said, but I think the rest of us probably do. I mean, even Jesus did. I don't care how well you live your life, somebody's not going to like what you do. Jesus even had enemies and he was perfect. And I'm sure those enemies or people have said things or done things to us that have been hurtful in our lives. You know, one thing I've always tried to remember, they hurt me once by what they said or by what they did, but whenever I start replaying it over and over and over in my mind, I'm just letting them hurt me again and again and again and again. Why am I doing that? But I've come to realize this too. When our enemies hurt us, people do things that damage us. In reality, whether you see it or not, they're actually blessing you. You say, well, how so? Well, you ever looked at somebody when they're misbehaving and say, I don't ever want to do that. I never want to be that kind of person. If nothing else, they're teaching you what not to do. And there's been times before I thought, I'm glad I saw that because I was thinking about doing it myself. I'm glad you did that. I think we ought to write our enemies thank you letters. We ought to send them Christmas cards and say, thank you for that because that helped me not to make that same decision, right? Even in those things, God can bless you. Look at this verse, Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. God can take the things that the devil intends to use to damage us, hurt us, bring us down. God can take all that stuff and turn it completely on the devil's head. That's how good God is. You're not going to get one over on God. That's how good he is. In Mark chapter 5, it tells a story of this man who was possessed, these demons, and Jesus heals him. But what stands out to me in this story, though, is in Mark 5, you look around about verse 6, it says, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me. For he was saying to him, come out of him, man, you unclean spirit. You know what amazes me about this? And this is what I wonder as I read this verse. Here's this man possessed, demon possessed, and he comes running up to Jesus. Don't torment me. Have mercy. I wonder something. Would that man have come to Jesus if he had not been demon possessed? If that man, if his life was going just perfect, he had the perfect life, he had all the money he could want, he had all the friends he could want, everything went his way in life, would he have cared about Jesus? I doubt it. Maybe, but I doubt it. If the devil had been wise, he would never have let this man get demon-possessed. Because that demon possession actually ended up leading that man to come to Christ. And you look in the Bible also of those lepers who came to Christ and said, have mercy on us. And Jesus healed them. All the sick people, all the wounded, all the people who were lame, all these people coming to Jesus that have been injured and damaged by the devil. I'm thinking the devil's not very smart, is he? And I wonder this, when is the last time I've thanked God for my demons that have pushed me to Him? Thank you for the demons that have drove me to you, Lord. Because if it wasn't for them, if I had just a picture-perfect life, I may not be following you now. God can actually use the things that the devil means to hurt us with to heal us. He can use the things that the devil means to bring us down with to lift us up. And I see that all throughout the Bible. A prime example of that, I think, is Joseph. In Genesis 37, Joseph's brothers hated him. They're jealous of him because he was dad's favorite, and they sold him as a slave. I'm sure that hurt Joseph. To know his own family members were betraying him like that and sold him as a slave, how could you? But we know how the story ends up, don't we? He went into Egypt as a slave, but he ended up becoming second in command in all of Egypt. And at the end of his life, Genesis 50, verse 20, when he met those brothers again, he told them, what you did, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God took what you did to me, and He blessed me with it. Now, we may not always see that instantly. It may take time. It took Joseph his whole lifetime to finally see that, for all those things to finally work out. But rest assured, God can take the hurt and the pain and things that we go through, and He can turn it into a blessing. He can. That's how good God is to us every day. Now, let me mention this too. If we're going to talk about blessings, there's one thing I do want to share with you. A blessing is still a blessing, even if you have to work to get it. It really is. Now, I always had it in my mind, if something is going to be a blessing from God, it ought to be the case that I'm just sitting there, and it just falls in my lap, and I just enjoy it. I wasn't even looking for it, just fell in my lap. I was sitting in my recliner, and there it is. I just enjoy it. It's great and wonderful. I didn't have to lift a finger to get it. Blessings may happen that way sometimes, but a lot of times they don't. Sometimes to lay hold of the blessing God has for you, it might require some work from you. But that does not make it any less of a blessing. You remember the Israelites when they were in Egypt, God told them, I'm going to take you out of here, and I'm going to bring you to a land flowing with milk and honey, the promised land. It's going to be full of houses that you didn't build. Those houses are going to be full of possessions that you didn't gather. There'll be crops out there that you didn't plant, livestock you didn't raise. I'm going to give all of it to you. It's going to be good. It's going to be a blessing. But didn't they have to leave Egypt, cross the Red Sea, march in the wilderness for 40 years, and then when they got to Canaan's land, they had to fight all these countless battles, and then they got to settle in the promised land. But it was still a blessing. There's a saying, you've probably heard it before. Some people miss opportunity because it comes dressed in overalls and looks like hard work. You may have heard that statement before. Well, I think it's true for blessings too. Sometimes we miss blessings because they come dressed in overalls and look like hard work. We don't see it for what it really is. And isn't the work sometimes part of the blessing? Don't you look back and say, boy, I'm glad I did that work. I enjoy a job well done, don't you? I think God does too. The work that we do, sometimes we look back and say, I was blessed because I did that. That's even part of the blessing. God, you can't stop God from blessing you. That's how good it is, y'all. Man, for years, I never saw any of this stuff. I had it in my mind of what God ought to do. And that brings me to this point, too, about prayer. God blessing us in our prayers. The way we typically think about prayer is, well, I ask God for something, and He grants it. That's the way prayer's supposed to work. And if God doesn't immediately grant the thing I asked Him for, then prayer just ain't working. Well, I'm going to tell you something. God is not a genie in a bottle that just comes out and poof, what do you need? That's not how prayer is really ever described in the Bible. The greatest man who ever lived, Jesus, when He prayed in the garden, you know what He said. He's over here asking God, let this cup pass from me. But then what'd He say? Let your will be done, not mine. This is what prayer really is. It is meant to be you pouring your heart out to God. Cast your cares upon Him because what? He cares for you. Pour your heart out to God. Speak to Him. Talk to Him. Let your requests be made known to God. That's Philippians 4:6. And God will handle those prayers in the way that He sees fit. We got to trust God to take that prayer and do with it as He wills. And how many times have you been in a moment in life where you prayed for something? You said, God, I got to have this. If I don't get this, I just can't endure. I got to have it. You don't get it. And you think, well, I guess God doesn't care about me, blah, 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 blah. Years down the line, you look back and you say, I'm glad I didn't get that. Because if I had gotten that, I thought it was going to be what I needed in that moment. But now I see if I had gotten that, that would have put me on a totally different trajectory than I needed to be on. There's that song, I Thank God for Unanswered Prayers. There's a lot of truth to that country song. There really is. What we got to understand is that God can see further down the stream of time than me and you can. All I can really see is right now. I try to predict some things, but I can't see the future, but He can. And you know what? I'm going to trust my prayers to somebody who can see the future, who has already shown me how much He loves me by sending His Son to suffer and die for me. I'm going to trust my prayers with Him. He will do with them what is best. He may give me the thing I ask for. He may not. But whatever happens, I know He's got my best interest at heart. I will trust a God like that who died for me. You better believe I'm going to trust that God. And I may not always see, like I said, the end result, but I trust the one who does. God blesses us, and He blesses us even with our prayers, even though we may not always think of it that way or see it that way. I think we got to look at prayer the right way. It's not me making my list of demands to God and He gets busy and does it. It's not really quite the way it works. I entrust it to Him, and He'll handle it the way that's best because He knows best. So let's think about it, folks. God blesses us in so many ways. Let's not overlook the spiritual things. Let's not overlook the common everyday things we get from God. Let's understand that God blesses us even in our hurt and in our pain. God can bless us. A blessing might even require work from you. That's okay. The work's part of the blessing along with that. That doesn't change anything. And God's going to bless me in my prayers too. I'll tell you, that's life-changing for me when I started understanding all this stuff. I realized how I had tried to fit God in my own box of what He ought to do and how He ought to behave and how He ought to bless me. And finally, when I realized that, you know what? Instead of trying to get God in on my plan, why don't I get in on God's plan? Isn't that what God calls us to do? Seek His will rather than our own? And that changed everything for me. And I thought, God's been telling me that the whole time, and I just wouldn't listen. God loves us. God's going to bless us. This week, as we go out, let's look for those blessings, and let's look forward to a brighter future. I appreciate you being here, and as we end, if you're not a Christian, you're with us, we'd love to talk to you and share the gospel with you. If you are a Christian, but you say, I feel like I've grown weak in my faith and I need help, ain't none of us here to judge you. Nobody's here to judge you. If you need help, there's no shame in that. We all need help at times. We're here to help you, encourage you any way we can. So if there's anything we can do for you this morning, let it be known while we stand and while we sing.